welcome back to another Ask a Pastor, and we will continue on addressing questions of singleness. So we began with just talking about in general what singles, what's their place in the body, how do they function within the fellowship of the saints in a local church. And now we want to address the question that we mentioned last week, is what can I do to be preparing for marriage? So someone who's single presently, and they want to know, what can I do to be preparing for marriage? It's a great question. It's something that every young person should be thinking about, beginning at some age. But the first thing I want to say is, if you're thinking about preparing for marriage, think about the context that you want to do that as a Christian. And that means that the first thing you should do in preparing for marriage is to be a faithful member of your local church. The Christian life is to be lived out in the context of a specific assembly of believers who've covenanted together to walk out the Christian life with one another. And so that's the context. So if you want to prepare for marriage, get connected to your church in terms of membership and live faithfully as a church member, fulfilling the functions that you're called to as a member. And so let's say you're a member of your church and you're serving faithfully, you're working at practicing hospitality, you're faithfully attending the gatherings of believers, you're hearing the word and you're applying it to your life, you're singing the praises of God together with other believers, you're walking in growing in discipleship. What are some more specific things that you can do to be preparing specifically, again, for marriage? And so in that sense, then again, you want to press it a little farther, so you're a faithful member of a church, but now as any Christian, you want to be growing in your sanctification. You want to be growing in godliness. And that means you're going to be pursuing certain things, and you're going to be putting off or putting to death or trying to cut out other things, right? That's the picture of the life of a Christian. We're putting to death sin. We're putting off what was connected to our old life in sin, and we're putting on Christ, and we're putting on godly character. We're putting on those things which belong to the Spirit. We want to cultivate the fruit of the Spirit. So that's generically. You want to be growing in godliness. If you want to someday be married, then you want to be growing in godliness so that you can come into that union with Christian character that's solid, that's continuing to develop. So then that's generally, but what about very specifically in terms of sanctification? And there I want to point you to, as you prepare for marriage, you want to cultivate biblical masculinity and biblical femininity. The difference in the sexes is glorious, and it's what God's created. And of course, that's what you want in marriage. You want someone who's different. You're a woman, you're going to marry a man, and there's going to be this beautiful union between those things that are quite different. And God has designed it that way. So you want to grow in that differentiation, in putting on godly feminine virtue or godly masculine virtue. And if you want to kind of see where to go with that, just turn into the scriptures, and there's different places you could go. Of course, you could begin in Genesis, but let's look specifically in Titus. When Paul's addressing here Titus, he's talking about instruction within the church. He addresses different people in different stations of life when he tells Titus to teach. He's supposed to address old men and young men, older women and younger women. So look what he says to the older women. Older women likewise are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They're to teach what is good, and so train the young women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind, and submissive to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be reviled. So if you're a young woman and you want to prepare for marriage, begin by cultivating these feminine virtues that connect to marriage and child rearing. This is what God calls you to, and this is what the older women are to be teaching the younger women in the congregation of the saints. So begin to cultivate things that would connect to loving of your future husband. One way to translate this verse, or one pastor, he likes to put it this way: to be into your husband and to be into your children. Practical way now is just to cultivate a love for and appreciation of children. It calls you to be self-controlled, to be pure, to be working at home, to be kind, and of course to be submissive to your future husband as a young woman. So focus on those kinds of lists, and then think about what aspects of your life are out of line with those things. Where do you need to grow? What needs to be put off? What needs to be put on and cultivated? And begin getting to work, asking God for help, asking for counsel from older saints as you want to grow into the kind of spouse that the spouse you would want to marry. It's one way to put it. Seek to grow into the kind of spouse that the spouse you would want to marry, and grow in these virtues. For the young men, similarly, there's a smaller list in this passage, and it's just one thing: urge the young men to be self-controlled. And that really tells us a lot about the temptations of young men, and putting their zeal, their strength in a very focused direction. Self-control, self-mastery. And this covers every area of your life. You need to be self-controlled in the sexual realm. You need to cultivate self-control in your working, in your strength, in your daily life, just in your management of time and your use of resources. So cultivate those things. And another list for the young men, just turn over to 1 Timothy chapter 3 and read the words to qualifications for elders. This is a picture of masculine maturity. And if you want to prepare for marriage, cultivate masculine maturity. So what does it look like? Let's just read it quickly. An overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. So again, there's this picture of godly masculinity. Cultivate the virtues that are connected to this. And then for both the young men and women, cultivate the practical skills that will help you in fulfilling your duties as a husband or a wife, as a father or a mother. You can begin working on those now. Cultivate practical skills that align with. So you look at those lists, you look at responsibilities of men and responsibilities of women, and begin cultivating practical skills in your life that will serve those things. So that's a brief picture of what you can do to be preparing for marriage as a young man or as a young woman, or as an older man or an older woman who's not married but would desire to be married. So let's do that. We want to be available as pastors to help you in that. You can go to your parents, you can go to older saints in the body, and begin working on those things. Next week, we want to address the question that comes kind of out of this one is, what if I want to be married, but I am not able to find someone to be married to at this point? So come back next week and we will address that question together.